Huh?
It's 5:05 and welcome in to a Wednesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. We've got some good news to report this morning out of Western North Carolina. Duke Energy is making significant progress in restoring power to communities that were severely affected by the impacts of Hurricane Helene. Crews yesterday completed construction on a third temporary substation near the Marshall area. That substation allowed them to restore power to over 1,000 customers in Madison County who have had intermittent power since last week. As of this morning, 84,000 customers were still without power, but at this point in time, 2.6 million customers that rely on Duke have been restored. However, it is a variety of repairs that present challenges for Duke Energy going forward. In Black Mountain and Swannanoa, the entire transmission infrastructure, let me say that again, the entire transmission infrastructure is gone and must be rebuilt. According to Duke Energy spokesman Bill Norton, he says it requires more manpower, more rebuilding of core lines, transmission lines, and everything else. Normally, we'd be done with the restoration process by now. He continued by saying, we've got communities where we can't reach them right now, so we're flying in new power poles by a helicopter. Duke Energy announced that it would set up a command center in Western North Carolina to serve as the company's base of operations while workers continue building the necessary infrastructure until everyone's lights are back on. This is also relevant as we take a look at the tropics this morning. Hurricane Milton continues as a massive Category 4 hurricane with its maximum sustained winds at 160 miles an hour, as it is set to make landfall and impact on Florida's west coast coming up later tonight and into the early morning hours of your Thursday. Duke Energy does service portions of Florida. The Florida west coast is where they have got part of their service area as well, meaning that they're going to have to straddle crews between portions of North Carolina that are already working and now more customers or now more linemen being surged into portions of Florida from the likely devastating impacts of Milton. We'll track those details right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. The North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, that's DPI, they are requesting $166 million from the General Assembly to assist schools that were affected by Helene. Of this, $150 million is aimed at covering losses in buildings, equipment, and technology that was not insured, with funds intended for repairs and renovations similar to those made in the eastern part of the state and central part of the state after Hurricane Florence. An additional $16 million is requested to compensate school nutrition staff for instructional days due to the hurricane. In addition to funding, DPI is seeking legislative flexibility, including changes to the school calendar law to make up for lost instruction time and expansions on remote instruction days beyond the current 15-day limit. The North Carolina Superintendent and Catherine Truitt presented those requests late last week, and lawmakers plan to vote on disaster relief. They meet in Raleigh today, with 5 Western North Carolina school districts remaining closed indefinitely due to storm damage. It is now 5:09 on the Carolina Journal News Hour. There's been a lot of conversation over the past year about a migrant facility that was opened in Greensboro, North Carolina. That conversation has been sparked once again with the devastation in Western North Carolina. To get some details on that, Katie Zender with the Carolina Journal joins me this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Katie, thanks for the time this morning. What is this facility in Greensboro? That in itself is not necessarily a new story, is it?
Right. So the Carolina Journal has been covering this story for over a year now. But this is a Greensboro ICF facility or influx care facility, which is basically a temporary holding facility for unaccompanied migrant minors, largely males between 13 and 17. And this is an 800-bed facility in Greensboro, North Carolina.
With that, starting on that part of it, there was a lot of controversy when this was first announced that this facility was going to be opened and operational. There's been troops and federal officials stationed there for quite some time. As of right now, what's the status of that facility as we sit here in early October?
Right. So this facility was technically set to open in March, but it never actually opened. In June, the HHS updated their fact sheet where they keep track of all the status of all these ICF facilities, because there's several across the country, saying that this particular facility had been ramped down to, quote, facility upkeep. So basically just running at, basic operations. And to my knowledge, there has been not one single miner housed in this facility since March.
Obviously, we'll talk about the details on that and all the money spent there in a later interview. Let's turn the topic now to what we saw back 2 weeks ago, the destruction and devastation in western North Carolina. Since then, Katie, there's been calls from very prominent lawmakers, not only in North Carolina, but at the federal level, to maybe use this facility for something else. What's the latest that you're tracking on that?
Right. So there's been a lot happening. Last week, former Representative Mark Walker, that used to represent NC6, called out FEMA and said, hey, why don't you guys use this facility as a temporary shelter for displaced Helene victims? This is a $50 million lease with the federal government. Local officials told Walker that not one single individual is currently being housed in this facility. The next day, last Friday, Representative Kathy Manning made the same comments. She said that, the HHS has been working on this for several days now, and it is in progress. So on Saturday, federal officials, including Senator Tillis and Representative Hudson, sent a letter to FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell, as well as Secretary of HHS, along with the entire North Carolina delegation, urging them to open up this facility and use it to house displaced victims of Helene.
So as we sit here middle of the week, this stuff has been brewing over the last couple of days. Where do we stand with the facility? Have we heard anything from FEMA? Have we heard anything from HHS, or has it been essentially radio silence from the federal side of the response?
Right. So the latest update we have is the North Carolina delegation sending this letter. This story went up on Carolina Journal, I believe, last night, if I'm not mistaken. And so we haven't heard anything back from FEMA or from the federal government as to if they're going to do this or not. It does look very promising. But since we've sent that, or since the delegation sent that letter, we don't have any further updates at this time.
Turning back to the facility for a moment here this morning, you look at the destruction and devastation, the towns, the houses completely wiped off the map. There's a lot of folks, Katie, that are going to be for years displaced from their property. And obviously, I don't think the idea is that you would shuttle and have people there for years. It seems like this would have been a great opportunity to at least get something out of this facility that all this money has been spent on. I guess that just wasn't part of the Fed's plans, at least from day one, and it took individuals like Mark Walker and others to really call this out.
Right. And so, so the Kathy Manning said that they are looking at the contract. The federal government is looking at the contract to see if it either even allows for this and to see if it can be amended to allow Helene victims to look at this. But Mark Walker, when I spoke with Mark Walker last week, one of the issues with this, not necessarily an issue, but a complexity of this is, how do we get these displaced victims to this shelter? Because Greensboro's over around 2 hours from, western North Carolina, depending on where exactly you're looking at. And so he said, there's lots of local organizations on the ground that are working. If you direct people to one of the 5 sites that they have, they are actually able to get these people to the facility in Greensboro.
And you're continuing to track this over at CarolinaJournal.com?
Yes, we are.
Katie Zender joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. 514 News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. Time for a look at your Wednesday morning commute with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick. Just check.
Winter Bowl Show.
This afternoon at 3.
News Talk 1110 and 99.3.
WBT.
Huh? 5:20. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. Also streaming live this morning over at the Carolina Journal on YouTube. Just search that and you can watch live on our video stream. In the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, North Carolina Congressman Richard Hudson, alongside Senator Thom Tillis, along with other Republican members of the state's congressional delegation, are urging federal officials to repurpose the Greensboro Influx Care Facility to support hurricane relief efforts. The facility, originally designed to house unaccompanied migrant children, has remained unoccupied, even though millions upon millions of dollars has been spent. The lawmakers sent a letter to the Health and Human Services Secretary and the FEMA administrator suggesting that the facility be used as a temporary shelter for those displaced hurricane victims or serve as a staging area for aid workers. Democrat Representative Kathy Manning echoed the calls, noting that the process to operationalize the facility is underway. While the facility was initially intended to house, as I mentioned, those migrant children for short periods of time, lawmakers argued it could play a critical role in the recovery efforts in western North Carolina. Unfortunately, like many topics and issues that we discuss, the movement of the federal government not as quick as it could be. The Greensboro facility does continue to sit essentially vacant this morning. We'll continue to track that story not only here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, but on our website as well at carolinajournal.com. Keeping our thread on what's going on in western North Carolina, the General Assembly, they are back in Raleigh this morning to handle a bill associated with relief for Hurricane Helene. North Carolina Senate Leader Phil Berger and the Speaker of the House, and Tim Moore, will lead a press conference this morning at 10 o'clock. We will be tracking that throughout the morning over on our website, carolinajournal.com. What is a ballot selfie? Now, the term and the phrase, it might make normal sense. A selfie, a ballot selfie, is a photo taken by a voter of their completed ballot. Often, those are shared on social media. However, in North Carolina, taking and sharing a ballot selfie is illegal because it violates state law that protects the privacy and security of the voting process. The primary reason for the ban is to prevent voter coercion, fraud, or undue interference. If people can show how they voted, it potentially opens the door for situations where someone could be pressured or paid to vote in a certain way. And they are, of course, asked to prove it and can do that with a photo of them and their ballot. This law is part of broader efforts to maintain the integrity and confidentiality of elections, ensuring that all votes are cast freely and without any sort of outside influence. We'll talk about ballot selfies coming up with Mitch Kokai with the John Locke Foundation coming up here in just a few minutes. Duke Energy continues to make progress in western North Carolina. Crews completed the construction on a third temporary substation near the Marshall area on Tuesday morning. With that, they restored power to nearly 1,000 customers who have been in the dark for 10 or 11 days. Imagine that. 84,000 customers still remain without power this morning. However, Duke notes that they've already restored power to about 2.6 million customers. With that, Duke Energy has their eyes on the western coast of Florida. That's another service area for Duke. Hurricane Milton is expected to make landfall as a high-end Category 3, low-end Category 4 hurricane coming up later in the day today or into the early morning hours of tomorrow. Duke Energy will be staging crews out in portions of Florida to get those folks with their lights back on as well once Milton passes through the area. It's now 5:24 on the Carolina Journal News Hour, turning our attention to and keeping it rather on western North Carolina. Let's look at the schools, right? That's we talk about power, we talk about infrastructure, whether it be water, sewer, electrical, cell phones, broadband internet. But what's going on with the school systems out there? Well, the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, DPI, is requesting $166 million in additional funding from the North Carolina General Assembly to support schools that were impacted by Helene. DPI outlined a range of needs, including financial and operational support to help school districts recover from the storm's devastation. The most significant funding request is $150 million, and that's to cover the cost of building, equipment, and technology losses for items not covered by insurance in the western half of the state. Based on current estimates of the damage, the funds would go towards repairs and renovations, as similarly provided during Hurricane Florence. An additional $16 million on top of the $150 is requested to ensure school nutrition staff in the affected areas are compensated for instructional days due to the hurricane, and obviously they have not been at work. Alongside funding asks, DPI is also seeking legislative flexibility to address the unique challenges posed by the disaster. They have requested calendar flexibility to allow schools to make up for missed instructional days, or alternatively, to count up to 20 days as completed. They also seek remote instruction flexibility, asking for an extension beyond the current limit of 15 remote instruction days. And as I mentioned earlier, the General Assembly will be back in Raleigh today, and they could be tackling some of these issues. North Carolina Superintendent Catherine Truitt said that DPI presented its funding requests to legislative leaders late last week, and on Friday, lawmakers said that they plan to vote on a disaster relief package when they were back in session. That session begins today. At least 5 schools in western North Carolina, 5 school districts, I should say, including Asheville, Avery, Buncombe, Madison, and Mitchell counties, are closed as they report, quote, indefinitely, or have no public time frame for reopening. And that obviously is going to be disastrous for learning loss in those areas. Over the weekend, Asheville Middle School was used as a water and food distribution center, and that does continue this morning. So as all eyes continue on the western half of our state, the General Assembly is asked to provide some, very significant funding to the tune of $166 million and make some changes to calendar law to allow some more flexibility. And again, as I noted, for some of those school districts, they don't have a timetable for when they can get students back to school. That is a pretty hairy situation for those individuals out in the western half of North Carolina. 528 on the Carolina Journal News Hour, News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. Wednesday morning drive into work. Boomer Von Cannon's got the latest in traffic.
Thank you, Nick.
WBT.com for details.
It's 5:35. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. We are getting good news, at least some good news, out of Western North Carolina this morning as Duke Energy is making significant progress in regards to restoring power to communities that were affected by Hurricane Helene. Crews yesterday completed construction on a third temporary substation near the Marshall area, which restored power to nearly 1,000 additional customers that have been in the dark for 10 or 11 days. However, 84,000 customers do remain without power, and it's a variety of repairs is what currently presents a big challenge for Duke Energy. In areas like Black Mountain and Swannanoa, the entire transmission infrastructure needs to be rebuilt. In many cases, the infrastructure is completely gone. Bill Norton, who is a spokesperson for Duke Energy, said it required more manpower, more rebuilding of core lines and transmission lines. Normally, we'd be done with the restoration process by now. He continued by saying we've got communities, we can't reach them right now, so we're flying in new power poles via helicopter. Duke Energy announced that it would set up a command center in Western North Carolina to serve as the company's base of operations while workers continue to build the necessary infrastructure until everyone's lights are back on in the area. They do not have, unfortunately, an estimated time frame for the some 84,000 customers that remain in the dark this morning. 5:36 on the Carolina Journal News Hour. You might want to take a picture when you head into a voting booth starting here in just a couple of weeks through early November. Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation joins us this morning to talk about ballot selfies. Mitch, good morning to you. What is a ballot selfie and why is it in courts here in North Carolina?
Well, a ballot selfie is what you would expect it to be, and that is you decide, hey, I just voted. I'm going to let people know I voted. I'm going to take a picture of myself with my ballot and put it up on social media. Apparently, a lot of people like to do this, but in North Carolina, it's against the law. And that's why it's in court, because a libertarian voter in Wake County, who is also a candidate for state senate running against a Democratic incumbent and Republican challenger, is challenging this law. She took a selfie with her ballot in the March primary, posted it on social media, and they got a warning from elections officials saying, wait a minute, you're not supposed to do that. Take this photo down. You could be charged with a crime. She has decided, and her name is Susan Hogarth, a libertarian voter and candidate. She decided, not only am I not going to take down the photo that I posted to social media of myself with my ballot, I'm going to do it again in November, and I'm going to go to court to make sure that I'm able to do this. So she filed a federal lawsuit against the State Board of Elections, challenging the various parts of state law that make ballot selfies illegal. And the latest development is that there was a hearing this week at a court in New Bern, in federal court, to deal with the idea of having a preliminary injunction that would block the law against ballot selfies while this litigation plays out. The latest development is that the Wake County District Attorney, Lauren Freeman, who had already said in court documents that she didn't plan to prosecute Susan Hogarth for a ballot selfie, has agreed to a limited injunction while this case moves forward. So there is still some possibility that this case will get thrown out because there is a challenge to Susan Hogarth even having the standing to be able to file suit. But at least for now, as this case is playing out, there's going to be no charge against anyone, at least in Wake County, who wants to take a photo with their ballot, post it to social media. The DA in Wake County has said, I'm not going to charge anyone with that.
There's a couple different places that we can go from here on the conversation. Mitch, whether the law is on the books, whether we think the law is right or wrong or stupid or makes sense, irregardless, there's the law on the book. What is the justification does the Wake County DA in saying, hey, there's this law that I don't really like, I'm not going to prosecute it? Is that not an issue in itself?
It could be an issue in and of itself, but basically the reason that Lauren Freeman said this was that Susan Hogarth had been asking for an injunction, which is separate from actually the lawsuit challenging the law itself. She said, while this lawsuit moves forward, which could take a year or more to play out, let's block the law for the November election. Lauren Freeman didn't really say whether she agrees with the law or not, but she basically in her court declaration said, I hadn't been involved at all in the letter that was sent to her threatening prosecution. No one from my office has contacted her. We weren't planning to prosecute her. I'm not going to prosecute her. So basically, you don't need an injunction in this case because there wasn't going to be any harm to this voter anyway. So she really hasn't said one way or another whether she likes the law or not. But at least in the case of this voter who was seeking an injunction, Lauren Freeman said an injunction wasn't really needed because there was not going to be a charge. But I think one of the most interesting things about this is I think this brings to light the fact that a lot of people didn't know it was against the law. You figure,
Sure.
okay, you want to take a picture of your ballot. A lot of people don't want people to know how they vote. But if you want people to know how you vote, you take your photo with your ballot. It shows that you voted, it shows who you voted for, and it helps you, in Susan Hogarth's mind, exercise your First Amendment rights to share with people what you think about the elections, who you voted for. She's a libertarian. She was showing off that she voted in the libertarian primary and voted for all these libertarian candidates. And so her argument is this is something that you should be able to do. And in most states, it's not against the law to be able to do this. There are more than a dozen states where these ballot selfies are illegal. And the group with which Susan Hogarth is working, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, or FIRE, has been challenging these ballot selfie bans in many different states and has won several court cases.
We talk about a ballot selfie. Mitch, if I decide first day of early voting on the 17th that I want to just take a picture of my ballot, not a picture of me in the ballot, but just snap a picture in the voting booth of my ballot for the candidates that I voted for, is that also illegal, or is this just specifically as long as I'm in the picture with the ballot itself?
No, taking a picture of your voted official ballot is illegal in and of itself. And in fact, in looking over some of the court filings on this, there are at least four different laws that are implicated. There's the law against taking a photo or a video recording or some other record of a voted ballot in the voting enclosure. There's a law against displaying your ballot to someone else. So, if sometimes someone may be taking the ballot to stick it in the machine. If someone else sees it and you knowingly did that and were showing it off to them, that could lead to a charge if someone wanted to charge that. There's also a law against allowing your ballot to be the vote on your ballot to be disclosed. So maybe someone else saw you vote, knows who you voted for, and told someone else who you voted for. That's also against the law. All of these things are implicated by this lawsuit.
It's a fascinating story. And is this something that's new on the books in North Carolina? Obviously, cameras and camera phones haven't existed forever. When did this all crop up in the state?
This actually is something that has been around for a while. And one of the justifications for it, and one of the reasons why some of our colleagues at the John Locke Foundation have been in favor of keeping the law, is that there is an argument to be made that if you take a photo of your ballot, you could be taking part in a vote buying scheme, that someone says, I'm going to pay you for your vote, but I'm not going to pay you till I know that you voted the right way in quotation marks. And so the proof that you voted for the right way was that you took the photo of your ballot. So that's been one of the justifications against giving people the power to take a photo of their ballot, is that it could be used as part of some vote buying scheme, which would of course go against all of the election integrity efforts that we're so in favor of.
Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation joins us on the Carolina Journal News Hour. 544 News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. Boomer Von Cannon's got the latest in traffic. Boomer, no pictures of your ballot, however. What's going on the roads?
Hey, Dave, thank you, sir. Thank you. Hey, baby.
5:50. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. Taking a look at some of the stories that we are tracking this morning over at carolinajournal.com. The North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, that's DPI, they're the ones responsible for public schools in North Carolina. They are requesting $166 million from the General Assembly to assist schools that have been affected by Hurricane Helene. Of that $166 million, $150 of it is aimed at covering losses in buildings, equipment, and technology that was not insured, with funds intended for repairs and renovations similar to those that had to be made into the state after Hurricane Florence back in 2018. An additional $16 million is being requested to compensate school nutrition staff for instructional days missed due to the hurricane. In addition to funding, DPI is also seeking legislative flexibility. What's that for? Well, it includes changes to school calendars to make up the loss of instructional time and extensions on remote instruction days, which are currently limited to 15 days according to general statute. North Carolina Superintendent Catherine Truitt presented those requests to lawmakers last week, and, well, lawmakers are back in Raleigh this morning. The General Assembly is back to handle a bill associated with relief from Hurricane Helene. While the General Assembly does not necessarily help directly assist in cleanup and things of that nature, they do hold the purse strings. They can allocate money, funding, and resources to various efforts. North Carolina Senate Leader Phil Berger and the Speaker of the House Tim Moore are set to lead a press conference at 10 o'clock this morning. We'll be tracking that throughout the morning over at carolinajournal.com, and of course we'll have the latest details coming up for you at 5 o'clock tomorrow morning right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Turning our attention to back to the schools for a second. There are 5 schools in western North Carolina, 5 school districts, including Asheville, Avery, Buncombe, Madison, and Mitchell, that are closed, quote, indefinitely and have no public time frame for reopening. Learning loss, unfortunately, going to become an extra added story to all of the destruction and devastation in the western half of our state. In the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, North Carolina Congressman Richard Hudson and Senator Thom Tillis, along with other Republican members of the state's congressional delegation, are urging and continue to urge federal officials to repurpose the Greensboro Influx Care Facility to support hurricane relief efforts. The facility, originally designed to house unaccompanied migrant children, has remained unoccupied after millions upon millions of tax dollars had been spent on it. The lawmakers sent a letter to Health and Human Services Secretary and the FEMA administrator suggesting that facility be used as a temporary shelter for displaced hurricane victims, or if not that, serve as a staging area for aid workers. Democrat Representative Kathy Manning echoed those calls, noting that the process to operationalize the facility is underway, and while the facility was initially intended to house those migrant children for a short period of time, lawmakers argue it could play a critical role in the recovery efforts in North Carolina. Unfortunately, as we know with things from the federal government, things tend to move at a snail's pace in regards to what's going on right now. We'll continue to track those details over at carolinajournal.com. Well, don't take a picture of your ballot or a ballot selfie. A ballot selfie is a photo taken of a voter of their completed ballot, and they're often shared on social media. You'll probably see some of those cropping up over the next couple of weeks. In North Carolina, however, taking and sharing a ballot selfie or just a picture of your ballot itself is illegal because it violates the state's law that protects the privacy and security of the voting process. The primary reason for the ban is to prevent voter coercion, fraud, or undue interference. If people can show that they have voted, it could potentially open the door for situations where someone could be pressured or even paid to vote in a certain way and then asked to prove it with a photo. This law is part of a broader effort to maintain the integrity and confidentiality of elections, ensuring that all votes are cast freely without outside influence. So as we sit here this morning at 27 days ahead of the start of 27 days ahead of Election Day, early voting starts a week from tomorrow. Do not take a picture of your ballot. It's illegal and against state law. With that, next Thursday, the Carolina Journal poll will be released. We'll have the details first for you on the Carolina Journal News Hour. However, there is an October poll presentation dinner happening in Wingate, just to the east of Charlotte at the Jesse Helms Center. Join Donna King from the Carolina Journal and Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation to discuss the results of those polls. The time of the event is 5:30 to 7 p.m. at the Jesse Helms Center. That's at 3910 US 74 in Wingate. You can get your tickets now. They're selling quickly by visiting johnlocke.org. That's johnlocke, LOCKE.org. And tracking continued destruction in western North Carolina, there is some good news this morning. Duke Energy continues to make progress in restoring power to communities that were affected by Helene. On Tuesday, crews completed construction on a third temporary substation near the Marshall area, restoring power to nearly 1,000 customers in Madison County who have been in the dark for some 11 days. With that, 84,000 customers are still without power. However, Duke notes that they've restored lights and electricity to over 2.6 million customers that were in the path of Helene. However, it's a variety of repairs that continue to present challenges for the power utility. In areas like Black Mountain and Swannanoa, the entire, and I repeat, the entire transmission infrastructure and system is gone and must be rebuilt. Duke Energy is currently using helicopters to fly power poles into certain areas where they cannot get their trucks and crews in there due to the roads being completely washed out. That's going to do it for a Wednesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We're tracking what is set to be a busy day in the General Assembly. We'll have all those details coming up for you tomorrow morning at 5 right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour.